LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. King Charles has travelled to Sandringham after being seen in public for the first time since sharing the news of his cancer diagnosis. He's today been met by his son, the Duke of Sussex, who's flown in from California. The watchdog is investigating 8 Metropolitan Police officers after a black teenager was stopped and searched 6 times in 5 months. Complaints were made by the 16-year-old and his mother after it happened in 2 areas of London last year. Liz Truss has criticised the government for failing to take on left-wing extremists as she announced a new Conservative group today. The former Prime Minister says popular conservatism, or popcons, can galvanise Britain's many secret Tories. Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood, though, has told LBC it's not a good look for the party.
Competence, discipline, that's what wins general elections. A party exhibiting tribal division or infighting or an absence of focus, that will not secure the support of the middle ground of British politics.
In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 68 points at 76.81. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.17.
LBC Weather.
With Ripple Energy, part-owner wind farm for a greener way to power your home.
Outbreaks of rain continuing to spread southwards tonight, lows of -3. Dry for much of the UK tomorrow, some rain in the southwest, a high of 10. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and very good evening. It's 8:01 on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. I don't know why, but I've been really looking forward to this panel. I suppose I should look forward to every panel, but there are some that you look forward to more than others, and this is one of them because we have with us Baroness Nicky Morgan, Conservative peer, who's a Cabinet Minister under Boris Johnson and David Cameron. Rebecca Long-Bailey is Labour MP for Salford and Eccles, who's a former Shadow Cabinet Minister under Jeremy Corbyn. Jim Pickard is Deputy Political Editor of the Financial Times, and David Buik, a businessman who's co-host of the Global Player podcast Money with Michael Wilson. They're here ready, willing and able to take your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first caller. It's Stephen in East Grinstead. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, thanks, Ian. Good evening to everyone. Will the latest splinter group of unpopular Conservatives amount to anything, or are they just a bunch of conspiring failed politicians with their hangers-on preaching conspiracy theory politics from the sidelines?
I think you got their name slightly wrong there. I know you did it with the tongue in your cheek, but that is, of course, popular Conservatives. Now, obviously, any political party needs to be popular to win an election. The Conservatives are 20 points behind in the polls. Nicky Morgan, I'm not sure you're spiritually aligned with this particular grouping in the Conservative Party, but do you not think they would be better if they spent their time trying to support the Prime Minister and win the next election rather than cause trouble? Because that's clearly what they're going to do.
Well, strange enough, firstly, I hope this panel lives up to your expectations, Ian, and good evening, Stephen. Thank you for the question. And strange enough, my invitation to today's launch of the Popular Conservatives got lost somewhere in the post. I suspect a lot of people's in the Conservative Party got lost because actually, I agree with you. I agree with the premise, I think, of Stephen's question, which is that extraordinarily for, I think Savanta found, for somebody who is unpopular, Liz Truss is now launching a Popular Conservatives movement. And I think something guaranteed to make the Conservative Party less popular and Rishi Sunak's life more difficult is the launch of yet another Conservative grouping. It's a very clear thing in politics. Disunited parties do not win elections. And the only thing that Conservative Party MPs, members, ministers should be focusing on now is what can they do between now and election day to put themselves in the best possible position to get the best possible result.
Let me play devil's advocate. Because they would argue, I imagine, that, well, this is actually a sign of real healthy democracy in the Conservative Party, that we have all of these different groups putting forward fresh new ideas to help the party win the election. Does that argument not have any credence
Look, that's just baloney, isn't it? I mean, look, Iain, you and I have been involved in politics for a long time, been involved in, Conservative politics for a long time. And I'm afraid the idea that anybody is helping the leader of their party or the cabinet who have got difficult enough jobs, there's plenty going on in the world that needs to be solved at the moment. The idea that they're helping in any way, shape or form by distracting from the work of the government, I'm afraid is just absolutely for the birds. And this is just a pattern. I'm afraid there are some people who claim to be Conservatives, claim to be supporting. We had this recently with this poll in the Telegraph newspaper, fronted by Lord David Frost, report in the Telegraph, which has just, again, been incredibly unhelpful to the party. And my colleague, my roommate in Laws, Lord Robert Hayward, has just been speaking in the Laws just this evening about the Electoral Commission. He thinks that they should be investigating why, a poll where you don't know who paid for it, we don't know anything about the group behind it. As he said, these people have fat wallets and no honour, and he's absolutely right to do so. And these people need to shut up and get behind the Prime Minister.
Jim Pickard, I think you had a subsequent engagement this morning and weren't there. What do you make of this group? Because it's clearly, I won't say it's a Liz Truss fan club, but most of the leading people in that, they were sort of from the Liz Truss, Boris Johnson side of the party. But they're all people who held senior positions in government who could have done a lot of the things that she was suggesting while they were in government, but failed to.
To be fair to Liz Truss, she only had 40 days of government in which to do some of those things.
Well, she has some fairly senior positions apart from being Prime Minister.
Of course. Now, Nicky pointed out that Savanta surveys have shown that Liz Truss is quite unpopular. I think she's actually, according to Savanta, the least popular politician in Britain. It's hard to imagine a less popular figurehead unless you put someone like Prince Andrew in charge of this operation. And so it's just kind of remarkable to watch the chutzpah of someone just kind of not realising that the country had a look at her, said no to her, and said no to a lot of her, certainly her economic ideas, and markets said no to her ideas. I think what's interesting here, though, is that just because some of the people involved with this particular splinter group of the Conservative Party may be personally unpopular, it doesn't necessarily mean that some of the ideas that they're playing with are not popular with parts of the population and in other people's hands could be. But I think, as a subgroup of a subgroup, we now have this ridiculous half a dozen right-wing Tory splinter groups. To have this splinter of a splinter group run by somebody completely discredited, I'm afraid, after her disastrous period in office, it just feels a little bit ludicrous. And kind of like Nicky was saying, it just hastens that idea that this is a sinking ship and everyone's squabbling. And I find it striking when I talk to Conservative MPs how despondent they are about the general election, because I still think that a hung parliament is not impossible. I think there's a reasonable chance of that, like a kind of reverse 2010 situation where the country wants to get rid of the incumbents but is not totally wedded to the opposition party, aka Labour. And therefore, the Conservatives are sort of almost talking themselves into a disastrous election later this year by fighting each other and by being totally giving up the ghost.
Rebecca Long-Bailey, do you look on at this and sort of slightly smile, or what's your reaction?
Not really, no. I think the country feels rudderless at the moment. We don't feel as though we've got a functioning government, and I think what we've seen today with this new emerging faction are the dying throes of the current government. They know their days are numbered, but what's more worrying for me is how reactionary and divisive this group will be for British politics. They're definitely modelling themselves on the Donald Trump school of politics. Liz Truss started off by calling people who campaign for LGBT rights and environmental issues as left-wing extremists. And that was quite worrying, because if those sorts of comments gain traction on certain news outlets, not yours, of course, Iain, then it could be very divisive for the country. David Buik.
Total distraction. I'm afraid I agree completely with Nicky and also with Rebecca and with Jim. How can...
This isn't going well.
Let me just put a little bit of an endorsement in it for me. 5 prime ministers since 2016, including David Cameron. Do me a favour. What more do they want? They must know that these are the smouldering embers.
4 prime ministers.
No, 5.
Oh, no, I forgot Theresa May. Which it's your influence.
Shame on you.
Your influence.
No, on a seriously note, just to get back, enough is enough, and they have to pull together now. The Conservative Party. I mean, it's a complete.
But we've been saying this for 6 months, and they show no sign of having any desire to do so.
I mean, there may be some really fun people in it, some intellectual input, but what they're doing is just damaging and trashing the brand, and it's got to stop.
Nicky.
Well, just to your point about they show no signs of doing so, I think what's forgotten is there's an awful lot of MPs in the Conservative Parliamentary Party, in fact the vast majority, who frankly are heads down, getting on with constituency work, doing their ministerial boxes if that's the position they're in. There are a lot of Conservative Party members who'll be out door knocking, all hours, Saturday mornings, and they look on what's happening. And, Jim was saying about he meets an awful lot of Conservative MPs who are quite despondent. The trouble is that there's always a very vocal, small number who inevitably are going to attract headlines and miss the fact that the rest of the party is still, trying to get on with being in government, doing the right thing.
It also feels to me a little bit like the party has shifted to the right. If you look back at 2016 and the rise of Donald Trump, there was a very convincing cross-party debate in Parliament where MPs across the spectrum agreed that this guy was basically a little risky and not someone who they really wanted to be leader of the free world. And fast forward 7 years and we have prominent Conservative MPs saying they would like him to win, and that is after a very long period. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg is one of them. I think Liz Truss has suggested that she would kind of prefer Trump, despite the implications for Ukraine, of course.
I suppose at least he might differentiate Emmanuel Macron from François Mitterrand, as Joe Biden seems unable to do.
But they seem so keen on free markets that they're prepared to forgive somebody who has lied, 20,000 times, who has all these charges against him, who I think most people listening, or a lot of people listening, will agree, raises a lot of questions about, Western democracy, and yet they're quite happy to endorse him because of his
Let's take a follow-up caller, Chris in Croydon, who might engender a little bit of disagreement among the panel. Chris, what's your point?
Yes, my question is this. Which should the UK prioritise, net zero carbon or net zero migration, i.e. one in, one out?
Well, the net zero policy came under multiple attacks at the PopCon launch, with 30p Lee Anderson, saying only odd weirdos care about making Britain net zero. Would you class yourself as an odd weirdo, Rebecca?
Well, I think that's open to debate, isn't it? I wouldn't, no.
Because actually, to be fair to Liz Truss, she has described herself as a weirdo.
But no, I think in answering your question, Chris, I think the most important priority for the next government is going to be the economy overall, and it's about lifting living standards for everyone. And net zero and the green industrial revolution, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be a key part of that in terms of the investment that it will bring to the UK, in terms of the jobs that it will create, in terms of the prosperity that it will bring to regions that have been deindustrialised and forgotten about for many, many decades. And it's also important because we've got to tackle climate change, and if we don't do it now, I don't think our children and grandchildren will forgive us.
And just on that, thinking back, you were really the architect of Labour's Green Prosperity Plan, weren't you? But it's been quite a few years ago now. What do you think of these reports that it's about to be ditched?
I haven't seen any formal reports, and Keir was out doing media rounds this morning.
But Jim's been briefed that every day, aren't you?
It's a confused picture. Everyone's arguing.
Yeah, but we did get confirmation this morning from Keir that it was definitely going to happen. And it's important because, one of our central missions as a party is to promote growth in the UK economy, and that does not happen in a vacuum. You have to have some government investment to encourage business investment alongside it, and that's why the 28 billion is so important. It's not about spending willy-nilly, it's about making strategic investment decisions that will support local businesses and will generate a wider economic return. And to ditch that, I think we might as well ditch our growth pledge as well alongside it, because we won't see that with some level of government investment and support.
So, David, net zero carbon or net zero migration?
Net zero carbon. Must be. The situation as I see it now, that is absolutely key in the next 10 to 15 years. The problem we've got is we don't have any money. And every single member of the public sector needs money, and it isn't available. And we've got a treasurer, we should call him Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is very keen on fiscal discipline. But we have to do something to encourage investment. At the moment, the companies are what I describe as risk-averse. They won't take any gambles at all. And this is hopeless. At the Mansion House speech, Jeremy Hunt asked business, industry and commerce, particularly pensions, if they wouldn't mind stepping up with 50 billion to invest in all the good things that we're very good at in this country. The silence has been deafening because we're not seeing the kind of incentives given. Like, if you want somebody to invest, stamp duty? You've got to be kidding me. It's got to go tomorrow. Corporation tax, 25%? Hopeless. You've got to get it down back to where it was at 19%. That costs money, but what you lose on the swings, you will gain on the roundabouts, because if investment is really exciting, people will make money, and therefore people will pay tax.
Jim?
I think it's not a kind of binary choice between net zero carbon, net zero migration. I think the two issues are they're intertwined, and they're going to become increasingly intertwined. If you imagine a situation in 50 years' time, 100 years' time, where the sea levels have risen substantially around the globe, we are going to have movements of people like we've never seen before. And therefore, if you're worried about people coming in boats to your shores, if you think there are a lot of people trying to cross the sea right now, a world where sea levels have risen by a substantial amount is a very alarming scenario. There's a fantastic fictional book called The Wall by a guy called John Lanchester, which envisages a future Britain with a massive concrete wall around our country, keeping the water out, keeping the refugees out. I don't think we want to end up in that situation, and therefore I believe, as difficult as it is, and however many siren voices there are saying it's all nonsense, we can just kind of ignore it, I think however we try and pursue that goal, it needs to be done somehow.
Nicky Morgan.
Well, I think Jim's completely right. I mean, the answer is it's not either or. And, governments are handling these two issues and many, many others beside. And it is all intertwined. And Jim's explained, why obviously climate change in other parts of the world is going to have an effect on migration, because people are going to come to places where, even if our climate's changing, it's more temperate than other parts of the world that are going to become totally inhospitable to live in. I mean, Rebecca and I are going to disagree, I suspect, about a number of things this evening, but I think what we can agree on is the fact that actually UK industry is doing very well in developing net zero technology, and is something that governments should support and invest in, and there are jobs there. I think the only thing I would say, just picking up Jim's earlier point about, the Conservative Party's moved more right and everything else. The fact is that public opinion on these things changes too, and politicians do have to respond. So there's no point saying that immigration's not a concern, which I do hear occasionally, because it definitely is a concern. You must hear that all the time on your programmes here. But so too is climate change. And actually, I was talking to somebody today who does a lot of work in polling. When they poll public opinion, the economy, cost of living is always number one. And then, 2, 3 and 4 is a mixture. It moves around between NHS, climate change and immigration. And so those issues are of a concern. You can't solve one without, addressing them.
It's really interesting, because at the moment, if you do a cost of living phone on LBC, you're not inundated with calls. When Rishi Sunak says, well, maybe it's abating today, I think there could be a little bit of truth in that. But the other three issues, you say you always get loads and loads of calls. Right, we're going to get loads and loads of calls on air with our panel in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Pump 4, please. Is it true there's a chance to win £250 worth of BP Me rewards points every hour?
Yes, every single hour.
Hey again, just a sandwich. Guess who's back?
Oh, midnight feast.
Every hour you get a new chance to win £250 worth of points to splurge on shopping, gift cards and fuel. Scan your BP Me rewards card with every qualifying purchase and you could bring home the win. BP, here for all of life's journeys. Offer ends 26th of February 2024. T's and C's apply. See full conditions at bpmerewards.co.uk.
Romantic retreats, luxury beachfront hotels, expansive family villas with sensational sea views. Not lots of, just the very best of. Simpson Travel, the magical destinations you love, the personal service you expect. We visit every one of our properties so we can handpick the perfect holiday for you. SimpsonTravel.com, because your time is precious.
Introducing the new all-electric BMW iX1 eDrive 20. Bold exterior aesthetics make way for a comfortable interior that features innovative technology to connect you to your drive like never before. With a range of up to 293 miles, now is the time to electrify your dreams. Search BMW iX1 eDrive 20 to book a test drive. Test drive subject to status and availability. WLTP range may not reflect real driving results.
I'm Susan Tanner from the Darwood & Tanner Dental Practice, a specialist in prosthodontics. I love working with dental implants to help patients with missing teeth regain their smile and their confidence. If you're choosing dental implants, our team are the experts who will be by your side for the whole journey.
From gum care to dental implants, Darwood & Tanner, celebrating 30 years at the forefront of world-class dentistry.
To find out more and meet our team, start at darwoodandtanner.co.uk.
AI may be the most important new computer technology ever, but AI needs a lot of processing speed, and that gets expensive fast. Upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is the single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. Take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/software. oracle.com/software.
Good evening, late-night revellers. This is the last bus home. Calling ears still ringing and tired dancing feet via warm fries or a cheeky cheeseburger. Our final destination, as always, is home. Plenty of McDonald's restaurants are open late tonight. See mcdonalds.com for opening times.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
With simpsontravel.com. Plan your 2024 holiday now.
Our panel today is Nicky Morgan, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Jim Pickard from the FT and businessman David Buik, and they're here to take your calls and text questions. Let's go to a text from Steve in Colchester. No idea how you can say the cost of living concerns are abating. It's not improving at all, which leads on to a text question from Harriet in Highbury. Should today's cost of living payments really be the last? Well, 8 million people on means-tested benefits are receiving their final cost of living instalment of £299 from today. The Prime Minister, in an interview this morning, claimed that the burden on hard-pressed households is starting to ease, for which he's got a little bit of criticism. I suppose it depends on your circumstances as to whether you think the cost of living crisis is abating, but should this payment today of £299 be the last? Jim Pickard.
I mean, the more macro question is, are things getting better? And secondly, is Rishi Sunak right to take credit for it all? And of course, when interest rates and inflation were going up, he said this is all out of my hands, this is all global forces, it's Russia's invasion of Ukraine causing an energy spike and global inflation, and he was correct about that. I think he can't really turn around and say, look, thanks to our tough decisions, inflation's come down from 11% to 4% or whatever it is today. I mean, yes, there was a little wage restraint in terms of the government and handling industrial action, but inflation has come down for other reasons, namely the Bank of England taking a tough approach. Should there be more payments for people on low incomes and people on benefits? I mean, there's obviously a very strong case for it. But I mean, I think the cost of living crisis is going to continue for quite some time. And a lot of the people who are in relative pain are sort of middle England people with homes, with mortgages, because ministers like to talk quite a lot about how people refinancing right now have got a lot easier than they had 6 months ago or a year ago. But if you were on a 3-year fix or a 5-year fix and you're now remortgaging, you are facing some horrendous increases in your payments. Yeah. And that process is still going to play out.
As Tory MP George Freeman has found.
Absolutely. I felt a bit sorry for George Freeman because people made it look as if he was saying he couldn't survive on 120 grand a year. He had particular personal divorce circumstances, which he wasn't sort of saying no one can survive on this amount of money.
You're a more compassionate man than I am. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
No, I don't think it should be the last payment. I think people are living through really extreme circumstances at the moment. And certainly when I look at my own constituency in Salford, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of people trying to access what's called the Household Support Fund, which is kind of like the emergency pot of money that the council has to deal with people who can't make their day-to-day living expenses. And it's expected to increase in demand over the coming year. Now, what's upsetting is that this is due to come to an end soon, and the government hasn't announced whether there'll be a replacement for the Household Support Fund. So there are many families now worrying about how they're going to make ends meet. But I think there's a wider discussion beyond inflationary issues that needs to be addressed by the government and an incoming Labour government, and that's about housing, because housing costs quite often in a lot of cases are outstripping incomes at the moment, and that's certainly the case in Salford, where renting in the private sector isn't affordable, even if you're
media types that have moved in.
Even a professional graduate on a good salary can't afford the levels of rent that we're seeing at the moment, let alone those people who are on local housing allowance. They definitely can't afford to rent in the private sector, and there aren't enough social houses being built to accommodate those that are desperately in need.
Nicky.
Well, we have a budget coming up in a month's time. In fact, a month tomorrow. The budget will... The 6th of March, isn't it? And I suspect that's probably when the Chancellor, having seen the latest Office of Budget Responsibility figures, will have made a decision about things like the Housing Support Fund and other payments. And I think there's no doubt inflation has come down, including both food price inflation as well, which I think was the really very painful bit for many households. I take Jim's point about mortgage rates having gone up, although those rates are beginning to fall, but it does depend on when you had to remortgage. I mean, the government can't carry on making lots of extra payments where the money, if you're going to put money in to make sure it's targeted, is in probably benefits, means-tested benefits, and you'd expect that set of announcements, as I say, to come in the budget. But I mean, going back to David's point, there is, inevitably in our economy, huge amounts of pressure and demand. Everybody is wanting more money, whether it's public sector wage settlements, whether it's NHS, education, all the departments are putting in their spending plans at the moment. And so the Treasury is going to have to go through all that and work out what it is going to be able to afford and who is going to get that most support.
David?
I'm going to go back on my hobby horse, but before I do that, let's not think that inflation is going to cascade downhill in the next 6 months. No. It's not, because there's an awful lot there. I mean, even the Federal Reserve had a real shock, what they call the non-farm payrolls, which is the number of people who put in employment in December was 353,000 in January, beg pardon. You add December and it's over 800,000, which tells me the US economy is buoyant. I think there's a little bit of a disturbance in Ukraine and a mild one in Gaza as well, which means if it got really nasty and out of sorts, oil price is currently $78 a barrel, wouldn't take a lot to take it up to 100. So I ask people to be very cautious about this thing. Interest rates going to cascade downhill come the summer and the autumn. Not necessarily, because we've got a lot of geopolitical problems out there. To take Rebecca's point, and she makes a very strong case, and I do that, so I'm going to bang my hobby horse. If we want people to have a better standard of living, do something about investment, create work, create jobs, create profits, so people spend a lot of money, and therefore that goes into the Treasury and then to public services. It's the only way out of jail now, because as Nicky said, everybody wants money and there isn't enough to go around.
But do you think the Chancellor has the imagination to do that sort of thing in the budget? Because he's not known as a sort of radical politician.
Yeah, he's not. I really think that, for me, it's the last throw of the dice. For the simple reason that we are still massively risk-averse in business. And that is just something that's been generated as a result of COVID. People working at home, things going not as swimmingly as they should. Jim made a point. The economy is improving, but it needs to select about 5 more gears for me before we really get cracking. That's why I think it's hugely important that he does something to make business really sit up and take notice. Stamp duty, corporation tax, and I've only got a very limited headroom, but that's where I do my sums.
I referred to something earlier on in the programme in our business update as what I call the Tunbridge Station Car Park Index, where for the
But it's true.
For the first time in 4 years, my station car park was full, apart from 2 spaces when I went to park my car to come in today. Now, that hasn't happened since COVID. Now, you can either put that down to more people going to work on a Tuesday and not working at home, or if you're going to be ultimately optimistic, you can say, well, that proves that the economy is getting better.
Good.
Now, I'd like to think it was the latter, but I actually believe it's the former. What do you think?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I think basically you're right in where you are, but I do get this sense now that, for instance, the banking fraternity, not the most popular sector in the world, I accept, but having been very happy, NatWest, JP Morgan, all these, stay at home, it's not a problem. Get your backside into work now. And that is coming back into lots of areas of business. And I think when that comes back, you get this wonderful interpersonal skill joy, which we get, which is people, you don't get the monosyllabic ug merchant saying,
Have you ever been in our newsroom?
No, I haven't. But no, seriously, it's so wonderful to see people communicate, talk, negotiate, create deals, create ideas. You can't do that from home. And therefore, I'm so proud. And if you're right, Ian, and I sincerely hope you are, and I hope Tunbridge is not the only place it's happening, because I think it would be
Seven Oaks too, apparently. I'm told. I mean, is it happening in Salford? I mean, do you feel, as Norman Lamont might have put it, the green shoots starting to come, or do you think that this is going to last for an awful lot longer?
No, I think people are managing as best they can. Certainly in Salford, and our local authorities doing its very best to try and encourage investment into our own local area to spur on local economic growth, but it's not receiving the support that it needs from central government, and that's because there's a huge black hole in the public finances. And as David says, there's two ways that the government and an incoming government addresses that. It either invests strategically overall in the economy through things such as a Green New Deal, or it taxes. And the problem is with taxation at the moment is that most people cannot afford to pay more in tax. That's not to say we can't have discussions about a wealth tax, for example, and that's certainly something that I think the government and an incoming government should be looking at to try and deal with some of the issues that the public sector's facing at the moment.
Okay. Can I just add one very quick thing? I think one thing I would say that food banks in 2024 are wholly unacceptable.
Yeah.
And therefore, some kind of help, even if it's not another £299 in, but towards those that really need it, I think is essential.
OK, well, we're going to move on to a very, very difficult question in a minute. I'm not going to tell you what it is. That's a tease, ladies and gentlemen, to make you stay listening. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
It's understood the King has travelled to Sandringham via helicopter after being seen in public for the first time since his diagnosis. Charles was visited by Prince Harry at Clarence House earlier, who flew back in from California. There's been a new last confirmed sighting of the Clapham chemical attack suspect in central London. Abdulazidi was captured on CCTV heading towards Victoria Embankment around 3 hours after a woman and her 2 children were injured. And the watchdog is investigating 8 Metropolitan Police officers after a black teenager was stopped and searched 6 times in 5 months. Complaints were made by the 16-year-old and his mother after it happened in 2 areas of London last year. LBC weather. Outbreaks of rain continuing to spread southwards tonight with lows of -3. Some rain in the southwest tomorrow, mostly dry elsewhere, a high of 10.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Call me cynical. I don't believe a word of it.
Straight to the point.
Why was the promise made?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Minister, what the hell are you thinking?
Listen on your radio and Global Player, the official LBC app.
Tea time. Just finishing homework. What's a replacement for fossil fuels? Wind power? I've got wind power, especially when I eat beans.
Archie, when it comes to greener technology, trust Swell Heating to keep you up to date with the latest innovations for your home. We provide air source heat pumps, photovoltaic panels and biomass boilers. Plus, we'll help you access any available grants. Visit swellheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm. No crowds, no noise, no stress. Just time. Time to make memories. Luxury Mediterranean holidays from Simpson Travel. Hand-picked villas and distinctive boutique hotels in idyllic destinations. We take care of every detail so that you can love every minute. SimpsonTravel.com, because your time is precious.
Emergency ambulance. Is the patient breathing?
I've hit a man in my car. He's not moving. I didn't think I was going that fast.
Is he awake?
I don't think so. I was only going 20-ish.
Okay, what's the address?
Church Road by the theatre.
Right, the ambulance crew are on their way.
I'm so sorry.
Stay calm. I need you to help him. I'm going to tell you what to do.
Please. He's not going to die, is he? I was only going a bit over.
Speeding injures or kills over 1,000 people in London every year. Slow down. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
How can we make cancer research breakthroughs together? Every day we ideate, build, trial, learn, trial again. We use virtual reality to understand tumours, revolutionise cancer diagnosis and save countless lives. Set up a monthly donation to Cancer Research UK to help us outsmart cancer and keep us researching month in, month out. Visit cruk.org/monthly. Together, we are beating cancer.
At Vision Express, breakage and loss protection is included with prescription glasses and sunglasses.
Really? That's helpful.
Yes, available on designer brands from £129. Find out more in store or online at visionexpress.com. Vision Express. Express your vision. Minimum excess required. Conditions apply. Ask in store for details.
Cross Question on LBC.
With SimpsonTravel.com for a selection of exclusive hand-picked villas.
8:34, Jim Pickard and I have been just debating the merits of Saltburn. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but don't watch it while you're eating is all I can say, and certainly don't watch it with your mother or your grandmother. He thought it was great.
It's a cult classic. Ignore him, he's completely right.
Right, Jim Pickard is here, Deputy Political Editor of the Financial Times. David Buik, businessman, he's co-host of the Global Player podcast Money with Michael Wilson. Rebecca Long-Bailey is Labour MP for Salford and Eccles and former Shadow Cabinet Minister, and Baroness Nicky Morgan, Conservative peer who was a Cabinet Minister under David Cameron and Boris Johnson. What was the difference?
Oh my goodness me, where do I start? I suppose David Cameron was sort of not long after the election, so it was a very clear agenda. I mean, look, one was pre-Brexit, one was post, and that was, certainly at that time, Westminster. Those are two big differences.
Right, let's go to this difficult question that Hassan in Cambridge is going to pose to you all. Hello, Hassan.
Hello, you really put pressure on me. Is anti-Zionism distinct from anti-Semitism? And does the panel believe that it's an acceptable belief protected by the UK Equalities Act?
Now, there was a judgment today in the Professor David Miller case which said having anti-Zionist views is an acceptable political viewpoint and is distinct from anti-Semitism. Now, Professor Miller has won an employment tribunal case against the University of Bristol, which sacked him after concluding he had made anti-Semitic comments in a lecture when he listed Zionism as one of 5 sources of Islamophobia. The tribunal ruled that anti-Zionism beliefs qualified as a philosophical belief and are therefore protected by the Equality Act, meaning Bristol University had breached the law by sacking the professor. So, as I say, it's quite a difficult one, this, from an ethical point of view, from a religious point of view, from a point of view of whether you believe that anti-Zionism is the same as anti-Semitism. Nicky, let's come to you first. You were dreading that, weren't you?
No, well, I mean, it's on one level, it's a fascinating question. I'm a former lawyer, and these are the kinds of things that you can imagine this being debated in amongst, well, everybody, I suppose, but law students for many years to come. I mean, I presume there'll be some sort of appeal. I have to be honest, I think this, at first reading, and I don't know the details behind it all, but this judgment makes me feel extremely uncomfortable. And I think that my worry would be that by somehow saying that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are different things, that somehow you're giving some sort of licence to anti-Zionism, and then you are asking the courts and others to tread an ever more difficult line of comments that are acceptable, in this case in a workplace or not, and in a lecture theatre. And I think that's incredibly difficult for employers and others to do. And my worry is that people hide behind what is actually an anti-Semitic comment by saying that it's anti-Zionist, and actually you're somehow licensing something which should be unacceptable in all forms. But that is, a reaction from hearing this first off.
David Buik.
Wow. Like Nicky said, I think it's a very difficult one because I think they're pretty closely aligned. Anti-Semitism, I think we all know, is pretty clear. But in terms of anti-Zionism, I suppose it's associated with being critical of the Israeli government, say, in their actions in Gaza. And you could say that they had a very strong point to be able to make after the 8th of October, 6th of October, and whenever it was, which was an absolute atrocity of the worst possible type. But then I think a lot of people felt there's overkill. And, what's gone on since then, to some people, is very unacceptable. And I would call that anti-Zionism.
Really?
Well,
would you? Well, there's a difference between being anti the Israeli government and actually not believing that Israel has a right to exist as a state, which is what my understanding of anti-Zionism.
I suspect your understanding is greater than mine. I mean, I've always felt it's to do with Israel and its policies rather than being Jewish, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, you're right, but I think it's entirely acceptable to criticise the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu without being labelled an anti-Zionist.
Well, that's where I think it's a question of understanding. I mean,
so now you're making me doubt myself. Let's have Jim as the arbiter here.
I'm no legal expert. I don't know the details of this legal case. It's an area that I avoid stumbling into because of my lack of knowledge of that part of the world. The only things I would say are that we have seen some conflation in recent years between what is anti-Semitism, what is criticism of the state of Israel when it does certain things. And I think we should be just careful of keeping those two things rather separate. One view I do share with Nicky is that I've noticed some young people sort of using Zionist almost as some kind of insult, as if it's a bad thing to be a Zionist. And you can discuss the ins and outs of the formation of Israel and all the rest of it. But my message to people is just be a little careful about talking about this kind of issue, because you can unwittingly stumble into anti-Semitism.
Rebecca.
Well, I haven't seen the judgment or looked at the case, and with my lawyer head on, I struggle to see how the tribunal has come to that decision. Because normally when you're looking at discrimination, it's on certain protected characteristics, and they've never, as far as I'm aware, gone into that level of detail in identifying what belief could be and what belief couldn't be. It's usually, your religion or, your ethnic group that determines your protected characteristics. So I'd have to read what it says, but I think it's about context, isn't it? And understanding whether what's been said is acceptable or not, and whether it is actually anti-Semitic or not. I'd have to see what was actually said.
Hassan, are you still there? Would you like to come back and give your view?
Look, yes, thank you. Look, I think these are very distinct, and I think the anti-Semitism has no place in an educational institution or society. But anti-Zionism is a criticism or critique of the state of Israel, which is a political entity which has been around for 75 years. And I think it should be perfectly acceptable to critique that and also question whether that should have been created in the first place. It does not mean you're anti-Jewish. It just means that you have a different political opinion about historic events and current events.
OK, Hassan, thank you. Let's move on to Billy in Ventnor on the Isle of Wight. Hello, Billy.
Hi, good evening, Ian, and good evening, panel. I've got a question about the dental crisis in this country. I've been on, I say a waiting list. I can't even get on the waiting list at the moment on the Isle of Wight. And I know it's been in the news recently. My simple question is, what do the panel think is the solution to the so-called dental crisis in all the dental deserts?
Well, the government's set to announce plans to offer dentists cash bonuses for taking on more NHS patients, along with offering up to 240 dentists an extra £20,000 to work for 3 years in so-called dental deserts, areas with very little access to dentists. Meanwhile, hundreds of people have queued outside a new NHS dental practice, which opened in Bristol yesterday. Police had to be called to send them home last night, and people were back in the queue in the early hours of this morning. I mean, that is an incredible situation in many ways, isn't it? Jim, let's go to you first on that with your fine pair of gnashers.
So I have an NHS dentist, but they're in such rare supply that this is the place I lived in 22 years ago, and I've kept going back, despite having moved house 3 or 4 times since then. I keep going back to the same place.
Get struck off.
Also, the fascinating thing here is, London is one of the places which actually has a decent supply of dentists. Greater Manchester, Birmingham, a couple of other big cities still do. But I was shown a map by an MP, a Tory MP, a couple of days ago, which shows the full extent of these dental deserts. Now, it may sound like little pockets here and there. It's enormous. It's most of rural England. It's the whole of Cornwall, the whole of Devon, most of Norfolk does not have a single dentist which is willing and available to take on new adult patients. It's different with kids, but this is a really serious problem. The only devil's advocate thing I would ask, and maybe other people on the panel will know this better than me, is, from my understanding, private dentists don't actually charge that much more. Are there enough of them to pick up the slack? I don't know.
Well, I had an appointment with my dental hygienist this afternoon. I can assure you she charged quite a lot.
85 quid.
More.
Wow.
I think mine was 660.
And I'll tell you what, dental hygienists are the most sadistic people in the whole country. Hello, Tanya. David.
Jim has obviously done his homework on this. I think you've seen the questions before we came here, old son.
Nonsense.
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. All I can say is that this has been a weeping sore now for 10 to 15 years, this dental situation, and people have left the profession. It was unbelievably cheap, relatively, to go to the dentist under the National Health System, and as costs have gone up, as the price of property to rent has gone up, as the cost of dental nurses have gone up, unfortunately, the charges have not been commensurate. And people have said, thank you very much indeed. Dental doctors have said, not for me. So this needs, as part of the overall national health, which is a subject which we probably have 10 programmes with you, Iain, on, but which for me suggests that with the whole of the national health system needs a complete overhaul. On a one-party system, it doesn't work. You're employing 1.5 million people. You need to have consensus and also involve the commercial world in order to do it.
Well, I was talking to Andrea Leadsom, who is now the Minister in charge of dentistry, before Christmas about this. And she was telling me how the dental charging system works. And I said, well, is it any wonder no one wants to be an NHS dentist? I mean, if you're actually being paid less than the cost of providing the treatment, who is going to do it? She said, absolutely, and that's what we've got to change. So I'm hoping that she will be able to do something about it. And this paper that's published tomorrow hopefully will go some way towards it. I think Labour are making some... I think West Streeting was talking about this today as well, Rebecca.
Yeah. No, I mean, dentistry is in crisis. In Salford, I was doing a debate on the dentist crisis. I had one of my office members ring up every single supposedly NHS dentist in Salford to see if they were taking on patients. Not one of them would take patients on. And it's so acute, the crisis in Greater Manchester, that people are reportedly pulling out their own teeth with pliers because they can't afford to go to the dentist. Now, the Labour Party set out its own plan on tackling the crisis. We're offering incentives to encourage new dentists to train and become dentists with a golden hello. We're funding an urgent access scheme, providing around 700,000 extra appointments a year. And interestingly, this is what the government's been saying today, and well, particularly with the golden hello and stealing Labour's ideas because they don't have any of their own.
Nicky?
Well, we'll have to wait and see what obviously is announced, and I'm afraid that is politics, whereby somebody says an idea and then somebody else goes, "Oh, that's a good one. We'll have that. Thank you very much." I do.
Did you ever do that as a minister?
Oh, I couldn't possibly say, but I mean, you're always interested in what other people are saying, aren't you? I mean, that's part of, if somebody comes up with a great idea, then, you know, isn't that what you do in other walks of life? You take it on and you run with it. I remember campaigning before the 2010 election on the state of dentistry in the NHS. So this is an issue that has been around, sadly, for some time. I don't think there's a shortage of people who want to be dentists. I suspect that probably the opaque NHS charging structure and the way people would have to comply. It's not just about the money, I'm sure it's important, but it's also probably working within the confines of the NHS, within the bureaucracy, within having to follow other people's rules, and therefore actually people set up on their own because they're able to run their own businesses. But the thing that has to happen is the fact that there is massive demand, and this is not just dentistry, but obviously just for NHS, lots of demand. I was talking to somebody today who was saying that maternal dental health, mothers-to-be with poor dental health, there are much more likely to be complications often in relation to the birth of their children. So really, as a country, we have to decide if we're going to fund some public dentistry, we are going to have to say it's going to be for children, it's going to be for people perhaps on particular benefits, and it's going to be for mothers-to-be, because you'll save money down the line if you're able to look after their
apparently, even if the taxpayer spends money on training you as a dentist, there is no obligation to stay in the NHS for a single minute, let alone 5 years or something. Which is that needs to change.
Of course it does. Of course it does. So that there are a number of things, but I think look, this is one of the conversations I think that we as a country probably have not wanted to hear as a population, some difficult truths. Dentistry is just one of the issues for some time. We are going to have to, and it's going to be a brave person Andrea Leadsom is a brave politician, so maybe she's the person to lead the charge.
Well, I've done my bit because I've given up buying sweets or chocolate, and I've done it for 36 days. Note that I'm counting every single day. That doesn't mean to say I don't eat any, but I don't buy any. You just get my consumption is 95% down on what it would have been last year, so I'm doing my bit, I feel. Well, it's 8:48.
This is LBC.
All the big names are here. Oh, who is that?
I think she was in the movie about that really big shark.
No, not her. The florist.
She's automating invoices on the go so she can spend more time on that flower wall.
QuickBooks could save you up to 8 hours a week, so you could bring your vision to life. That's how you business differently. Intuit QuickBooks.
It turns out you can please all of the people, all of the time. Garden games for the kids, a separate cottage for the grandparents, a private chef for that special occasion. Simpson Travel. Idyllic Mediterranean holidays that everyone will love. We take care of the details so you can enjoy the moment. SimpsonTravel.com. Because your time is precious.
Hello there. If you travel by train on the East Coast Main Line, here's some important news about major signalling upgrades impacting train services throughout February. Thameslink and Great Northern train services between London and Ely, Peterborough and Kings Lynn will be affected from Saturday the 10th to Sunday the 11th and Saturday the 17th to Tuesday the 20th of February. Some journeys will take longer and may involve a replacement bus service. Please check before you travel at nationalrail.co.uk/ECDP.
Introducing the new all-electric BMW iX1 eDrive 20. Bold exterior aesthetics make way for a comfortable interior that features innovative technology to connect you to your drive like never before. With a range of up to 293 miles, now is the time to electrify your dreams. Search BMW iX1 eDrive 20 to book a test drive. Test drive subject to status and availability. WLTP range may not reflect real driving results.
At Tesco Mobile, we're putting your contract price on ice. So right now you can get this unlimited data SIM for just £20 a month with Club Card prices, saving you £120. That's value frozen in. Plus we'll throw in £30 worth of Club Card points too. This is Supermarket Mobile. Search Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
Ends 24th of March. Club Card and 24-month credit agreement required. Subject to status. Value issued at 3,000 Club Card points. Terms at tescomobile.com/terms.
Cross Question on LBC.
With SimpsonTravel.com for hand-picked villas and boutique hotels.
8:51, you really are going to want to listen to their answers for the fun question at the end, which I won't tell you what it is at the moment, but it's a good one. Nicky Morgan, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Jim Pickard and David Buik with us. Let's go to a text question from Bill, who says, a Tory MP said today that doctors deserve a bigger pay rise than they're currently being offered. Is she right? Well, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt told his Tory colleague, Theresa Villiers, that junior doctors had a very fair offer. Rebecca?
Yes, they do. They're under incredible pressure at the moment. They've been trying to hold our broken NHS together for the last 15 years or so with chronic underfunding. They're working all the hours God sends. We clapped them during the pandemic. The very least we can do is make sure that they're being paid a decent salary.
So they're being offered, I think the equivalent, is it 11.1 or 12.1%? They're asking for 35%. What do you think they should be offered?
Well, I think it's up to the union to negotiate with that, but certainly I think they deserve more than the government's offered them.
David?
It's a very difficult one, but I think it's got to be more than 2 years. I think to give somebody more than 11.25% over a 2-year period, and I do accept the doctors are grossly underpaid. There's no question of any doubt about it. But I think it needs probably a 5-year deal. And what's upset me is the inability for anybody to get round a table and actually talk about it, because it seems to have been, the silence seems to have been deafening. Because unless people stop striking, they're not going to talk. That doesn't work. You need to talk.
Jim?
I think the trade unions have been clear that the 35% pay rise they want wouldn't just be immediate. It could be spread over several years. I mean, it's a very difficult political decision to give a big pay rise to any public sector workers. I think where Rishi Sunak has messed up is that he has his 5 political targets, and one of those targets was getting NHS waiting lists down. And what is the primary reason? He would say himself that waiting lists have gone in the opposite direction is because of the industrial action. He could have solved that industrial action by paying more. So, leaving aside the state of the public finances, just in political terms, he seems to have shot himself in the foot.
Nicky?
Well, you need to pay people what's necessary to get people back to work, and I agree. Perhaps holding out for all strikes to be stopped before you have a conversation. I mean, the reality is there'll be conversations going on behind the scenes, and those are very important conversations. I think my uncomfortable. I mean, 35% is clearly not. And I think the last time I was on this panel, I said that's clearly not going to be paid. It's not going to be something that's affordable. My worry is actually when you look at what the nurses who do a fantastic job settle for. I think it was a lot less than 11%. And whilst, of course, doctors, train for longer, take responsibility, we couldn't run our NHS without those wonderful nurses. So I'm afraid to say I think that so far the demand is something. I mean, it'd be interesting to know. I don't know in what context Theresa Villiers said it, and how she thinks that actually that would sit with other public sector wage demands and negotiations that have happened.
Great. Well, let's move on to another caller question from David in Gravesend. Hi, David.
Hi, Ian. Hi, everybody. The question, if Trump became president, would he break up NATO?
Short and sweet. Well, the New York Times claims officials in the German government are concerned that the US might withdraw from NATO if Trump returns to the White House next January. Meanwhile, Trump is telling Republican senators to reject a $120 billion plan by the Biden administration, which would create $60 billion of new military aid for Ukraine and also $14 billion of aid for Israel in return for committing extra funds to the US-Mexico border. Rebecca.
I think Trump creates very uncertain geopolitical times, and we're already in uncertain geopolitical times. I don't know what he'll do. I think that's the problem with Trump, is you just don't know what he's capable of and what he's going to do next. But certainly he's been behind a big campaign with the Republicans to encourage them to vote against Joe Biden's bill, which was a bill that kind of encapsulated aid for Ukraine and Israel, along with some immigration proposals as well. Now, the problem with particularly Ukraine, I think, is that would undermine international agreements that the US made in the 1990s to support the Ukraine in the event that they were ever invaded by a hostile aggressor. I think the UK was part of that agreement. Interestingly, Russia was as well. They breached that agreement. But that was in return for Ukraine relinquishing its nuclear weapons at the time. And the point I'm making is that, you have international agreements for a reason. And if you're a country that does not observe those international agreements, then it creates the impression that you can't be trusted in the future.
Nicky?
Well, I don't think it would break up NATO, but I don't want to see America leave. I understand, I read somewhere at the weekend that Congress has apparently passed something to say that actually a future president could not pull out of NATO without congressional approval. And I was very pleased, of course, it depends who's running Congress, I guess, but I was very pleased to see that extra check was there.
Jim?
I think the worst case scenario of a Trump victory from the perspective of European capitals is that the US pulls out of NATO, potentially, that American support for Ukraine is withdrawn, and perhaps in some ways we can't predict he destabilises the Middle East further. The best case scenario is that none of that happens. And the thing about Donald Trump is that I don't think necessarily that even he knows what he's going to be doing tomorrow or next week, let alone next year. He seems to say a lot of things off the top of his head. He's completely capricious. We know that already.
David?
There's a wonderful podcast that LBC's Lewis Goodall had with Lord David Owen about Trump. And as you know, his wife is American, Debbie, and she says Trump will be the next president. And he heaved a huge sigh of relief. But to answer your question, depends which way the wind's blowing.
Mm. Okay, that's interesting. Right. Let's move on to our fun question for the end of the programme. This is from Michelle in Liverpool. A group of local school kids have joined up with the police to aim speed guns at motorists as part of a road safety campaign. What kind of weird work experience did you get through school? Jim?
It's not a weird work experience, but when I was about 16, I did a paper round, and I had to cycle from my village to the neighbouring village of Castleton and go up a hill and distribute all these newspapers. And it took probably about an hour and a half. And for 7.5 hours a week, I got paid £5. And I am quite old, but it's not that long ago. And for this job, I was nicknamed Mug by my friends.
I can top that. I used to muck out my dad's pigs on a Saturday morning and got paid 10 pence an hour.
Oh, you win that one.
Yeah, I think I do. David?
I'm going to surprise you. Mine was really working as a busboy at the Banff Springs Hotel in Alberta. In a period of 6 months, I had $3,000. I blew it all on one card on the last night there, the whole lot. It's the equivalent of 30,000 quid today.
Wow.
Amazing.
And we trust you for your financial...
There you are.
Goodness me,
I'm still relatively solvent.
I hope Nick Ferrari doesn't know that. Rebecca.
It wasn't a work experience, but it's my weirdest ever job. When I was on the summer holidays from university one year, I'd been working part-time in a bookshop, so I thought, I'll go and find another bookshop to work in for the summer. And there was this bookshop near Piccadilly train station in Manchester, and I went in and it had all train books and bus books, and I thought, it's thematic because it's next to the train station, the real books must be upstairs. Went and spoke to the manager and said, I've got experience working in a bookshop, can I do some, time over the summer? And she was like, yeah, that's great. Anyway, I realised the week later when I started that it was a train and bus spotters bookshop. So I had 6 weeks giving people timetables and books about particular buses, and they had a video on stream constantly in the shop as well that showed a bus just driving around Manchester.
Oh, God.
It was really random. Lovely people, but really random.
Wonderful.
I've got no response to that. Nicky?
I don't think mine can compete at all. My work experience when I was at school, I ended up following a barrister around for a week and ended up in court in the Old Bailey. Where
What had you done?
Strange enough, I was sitting at the back of the court, watching as the defendants were sent down and listening to their families being extremely upset as the judge pronounced quite long sentences for them to be.
And you thought that's the career for me?
And I thought, I think I won't do that bit of law. I think I'll do the other bit that involves sitting behind a desk.
Right. Well, thank you very much all for joining us this evening. You did live up to my expectations, I have to say. Now, tomorrow, we are going to be joined on the panel by the Green Party peer and former leader, Natalie Bennett, the Conservative MP and former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, the political commentator, Benedict Spence, and the journalist and author, Paul Mason, who's trying to be a Labour MP. So, in the next hour, we are going to return to a subject that we covered about a month ago, and it's all about violence in schools, because a primary school teacher who was beaten and kicked by a Year 5 pupil, that's a 9 to 10-year-old, is suing her former employer for £25,000. Also, this week, Sadiq Khan, I think, has suggested that kids who are convicted of knife crime should not be excluded. So I want to ask, what more should we do to protect our teachers from violent school children? And secondly, do we need to look at the exclusion rules a little bit more closely? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom.